Welcome to Anatomy of the Extraordinary, the podcast that unveils true, remarkable stories from the edges of human experience. I'm your host, and today we dive into another extraordinary journey.
It is 11:00 p.m. on Saturday, September 11th, 1971. We are in the affluent, quiet neighborhood of Marylebone in central London.
Right.
Specifically, a flat on Wimpole Street. Inside is a man named Robert Rowlands. He is an amateur radio enthusiast just getting ready for bed. He's twisting the dial of his Citizens Band radio, trying to find the faint signal of Radio Luxembourg so he can fall asleep.
Yeah, just a normal Saturday night.
Exactly. But instead of late-night music, the speaker suddenly sputters and cracks with heavy, localized static, and then a voice cuts through the dark room.
Oh, wow.
It's an urgent, highly agitated London accent. The voice just says, "We've got about 400,000. Let you know when we're coming out."
And the sensory reality of that moment is just incredibly striking when you read through Rowland's original accounts. He notes an immediate, distinct difference in the acoustic quality of the transmission.
Right, because of the environment they're in.
Exactly. He is taking up a live conversation between two men, but they are in wildly different environments. One voice is sharp, crisp, and carrying the faint whistle of wind, basically a lookout perched on a cold rooftop.
Mm-hmm.
The other voice is deeply muffled. It's echoing, sounding as though it is trapped in a highly confined, completely concrete, fume-filled space somewhere deep underground.
So Rollins is sitting there in his pajamas, realizing he isn't listening to a radio play. Because of how radio frequency propagation works in a dense urban environment, especially with the equipment they had in 1971, he knows that whoever is transmitting has to be within a mile, maybe 2 miles max, of his own bed.
Yeah.
He realizes he is listening to a live, ongoing siege of a bank vault.
Which brings a massive stack of source material to our table for this deep dive. We are sorting through declassified police reports from Scotland Yard, historical archives, decades of journalistic investigations, and the actual transcripts of that radio interception to reconstruct the 1971 Baker Street robbery.
And as we unpack those sources, we're confronted with this central paradox. We are looking at a ragtag group of amateur criminals who managed to tunnel their way into the Baker Street branch of Lloyd's Bank.
Which was considered the Fort Knox of London, by the way.
Right, exactly. They bypassed state-of-the-art security, they hauled away millions in cash and jewels, and they did it all entirely unnoticed, without ever using a single weapon or making a single threat of violence.
It is a phenomenal logistical puzzle. I mean, what's fascinating here is the sheer audacity. We are talking about a target in the middle of a densely populated, highly trafficked metropolis.
Yeah.
To breach it from below requires moving literal tons of earth and concrete. The fundamental question is how a crew achieves a massive feat of subterranean engineering without triggering a single seismic alarm and without anyone on the busy streets above noticing a thing.
The answer to that puzzle and the origin of that muffled voice echoing out of Robert Rowlands' radio actually starts a year earlier, in 1970. And the mastermind behind this entire operation wasn't some legendary underworld boss. He was a 38-year-old photographer from North London named Anthony Gavin.
Gavin is a fascinating psychological study in these records. Because, on paper, he is just a photographer.
Right.
But his background is much more rugged. He was a former physical training instructor in the Royal Fusiliers of the British Army. The profiles describe him as a highly disciplined, physically imposing man with a really forceful personality.
Yeah, he wasn't someone to mess with.
No, not at all. He wasn't a petty thief. He was a man deeply embedded in the periphery of the London underworld, looking for a singular, life-altering score. And you really have to view his ambition through the lens of 1970s Britain.
Oh, absolutely. The economic backdrop was bleak.
Exactly. The country was suffering an economic hangover, high unemployment, industrial strikes, just a pervasive national gloom. People were looking for unconventional ways out of the daily grind.
But Gavin doesn't get the blueprint for this escape from the underworld. The crazy thing is, he gets it from the local library.
I love this detail so much.
It's wild. The core inspiration for the Baker Street robbery is an 1891 Sherlock Holmes short story by Arthur Conan Doyle called The Red-Headed League.
The parallels between the story and the crime are undeniable. In Doyle's fiction, thieves invent a fake society to hire a pawnbroker, basically paying him to leave his shop every day to copy out an encyclopedia.
Right, just to get him out of the building.
Exactly. With the shop empty, the thieves spend their days in his basement, digging a tunnel directly into the vault of a neighboring bank.
And the target Gavin chooses for his real-life adaptation is the Lloyds Bank branch located at 185 and 187 Baker Street. He is literally staging a Sherlock Holmes plot 2 blocks down from Holmes' fictional residence at 221B Baker Street.
Talk about leaning into the theme.
Yeah, but having the vision is one thing, right? Gavin knows he isn't an engineer. He can't execute a subterranean breach of a fortified vault completely alone. He needs a highly specialized, covert logistics team.
And the recruitment strategy outlined in the police files shows a brilliant compartmentalization of skills. Gavin brings in a man named Red Tucker. Tucker is a second-hand car salesman, but his crucial asset is that he has what they call a clean skin.
Meaning no criminal record.
Exactly. He has absolutely no police record. Plus, he knows how to wear a sharp suit, and he projects the aura of a wealthy, respectable gentleman. His sole job is reconnaissance.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. How does a car salesman map the inside of a bank vault without drawing suspicion? I mean, you can't exactly walk into a bank with a tape measure and a clipboard.
No. You use the bank's own culture of discretion against it. In December 1970, Tucker walks into the Baker Street branch under a fake name. He opens an account with a deposit of £500.
Which is a lot of money back then.
Yeah, in today's money, that's roughly £6,000. It establishes him as a serious, wealthy client.
Right.
2 months later, he rents a safety deposit box. Now, the standard practice for a bank catering to high-net-worth individuals is absolute privacy. So when Tucker asks to access his box, the bank staff escort him into the vault, unlock his box, and then they leave the room entirely.
Just leave him in there.
Completely alone. No cameras, no guards hovering.
So he is left completely unsupervised in the target zone. But he still needs to measure the physical space. Our sources note he visited that box 13 separate times over the next few months, and he always brought an umbrella with him.
The umbrella is such a beautiful piece of low-tech espionage.
It really is.
Tucker knows the exact length of the umbrella, and he knows the exact measurement of his own outstretched arm span. While he's alone in the vault, he uses those 2 known variables to painstakingly measure the distance between the walls, the heavy steel cabinets, and the center of the room.
But arm spans and umbrellas only give you rough estimates. If you are digging a tunnel from an entirely different building, a rough estimate means you might tunnel right into a reinforced steel pylon instead of the open floor. How did he get precise coordinates?
He looked down. Tucker realized that the floor of the vault was covered in standard linoleum tiles. He measured one and found it was a perfectly uniform 9-inch square.
That is so smart.
Right. By simply counting the tiles across the floor, he was able to create a flawless, mathematical, 2-scale Cartesian plane of the room. He plotted the exact coordinates of the furniture and the empty floor space, providing Gavin with the precise target they needed to hit from beneath the earth.
So with the blueprint secured, Gavin expands the crew. He brings in another clean-skinned car salesman, Thomas Stevens, to handle the acquisition of heavy industrial tools. He recruits Bobby Mills to act as the surface lookout. And crucially, he brings in Mickey Gervais, known as Skinny. Skinny Gervais is a former alarm company employee. He is an absolute expert in burglar alarms, specifically the seismic sensors embedded in the bank's architecture.
And finally, they need a staging ground, a place to actually start the dig. The records show a 64-year-old silent partner named Benjamin Wolfe enters the picture here.
Okay.
Wolfe uses £10,000 to purchase the lease for a storefront called Le Sac. It's a shop that sells leather goods and knickknacks, located exactly 2 doors down from the bank.
Perfect location.
Yeah, and Wolfe immediately whitewashes the front windows to completely obscure the interior from the street, and he puts up a sign claiming the shop is closed for refurbishment.
So they now have a concealed base of operations. But there is a massive physical obstacle. The distance between the basement of Le Sac and the bank vault is roughly 40 feet.
Right.
And sitting directly between them on the street level is a bustling restaurant called the Chicken Inn.
Which is open for business.
Exactly. So Gavin and his crew descend into the basement of the leather shop. They use heavy tools to break through 6 inches of solid concrete flooring, hit the raw earth, and begin tunneling horizontally. They literally use the basement floor of the Chicken Inn as the roof of their tunnel, heading straight for Tucker's coordinates.
This excavation phase lasts for 9 consecutive weekends, from late August into September. They only dig on weekends to minimize the risk of the subterranean noise being overheard by the weekday crowds.
I am stuck on the physical reality of this, though. We are talking about amateur criminals secretly hauling earth out of a basement in the middle of central London. The police reports indicate they removed exactly 8 tons of rubble.
8 tons.
How do you move a literal mountain of dirt out of a storefront without the entire neighborhood noticing?
It requires extreme discipline. I mean, they couldn't just dump it on the street. The operational files revealed they bagged the earth and the broken concrete into heavy-duty plastic boxes and sacks and simply stacked them to the ceiling in the back rooms of the Lesac shop.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they were hoarding the displaced earth inside their own staging ground, living and working in incredibly cramped, filthy conditions alongside actual tons of dirt.
But even if they hide the dirt, what about the bank's security systems? Mickey Gervais was brought in to handle the alarms, but the vault floor was rigged with highly sensitive trembler alarms. If we picture these alarms like a spider web, they're designed to detect the microscopic vibrations of someone trying to cut or dig through the concrete.
Right, any impact.
So the heavy thudding of pickaxes and shovels, just feet away, should have sent the police swarming instantly.
This is where we see a staggering intersection of luck and environmental manipulation. During the late summer of 1971, the city was conducting extensive roadworks right outside the bank on Baker Street. Pneumatic drills were tearing up the pavement for weeks.
So the city is creating its own massive seismic shock waves.
Exactly. The roadworks were sending constant, violent vibrations deep into the ground. These vibrations were repeatedly tripping the bank's trembler alarms.
Oh, wow.
The police and the private security company were rushing to the Baker Street branch day after day, only to unlock the doors, check the vault, and find it completely secure. It created a severe boy-who-cried-wolf scenario.
So they stopped taking it seriously.
Worse than that, the security company eventually made a fatal administrative decision. To avoid the constant, expensive false positives generated by the street construction, they simply turned the floor alarms off.
You are kidding. They intentionally blinded their own security system. The very mechanism designed to stop a tunneling operation was deactivated because the environment was too noisy.
Completely deactivated.
But even with the alarms off, digging a tunnel is loud. You mentioned they were tunneling directly beneath the floorboards of the Chicken Inn restaurant. Did no one hear 8 tons of earth being moved?
Well, one person did. In mid-August, a waiter working a weekend shift at the Chicken Inn heard a loud, rhythmic thudding coming from beneath the restaurant's floor.
Oh.
It bothered him enough that he actually walked out onto the street, went over to Lesac, and peered through a small gap in the whitewashed windows. He actually shouted through the glass, threatening to call the police about the noise.
That is the moment the entire operation should have collapsed. A civilian is standing on the sidewalk, looking into the staging ground, threatening to bring law enforcement.
The lookout, Bobby Mills, spots the waiter instantly and radios down into the tunnel. Gavin drops his tools, climbs out of the dirt hole, brushes himself off, and opens the door.
I can't even imagine the adrenaline.
Right. But he plays the role of a highly stressed, overworked contractor to absolute perfection. He apologizes profusely, explaining they are just trying to get some weekend renovation done on a tight deadline, and promises to keep the noise down.
And it works.
It works. The waiter, likely not wanting to cause a massive scene over standard construction noise, accepts the apology and goes back to his shift.
That is incredibly lucky. So after 9 agonizing weekends, the 40-foot tunnel is complete. They reach the exact subterranean coordinates plotted by Reg Tucker. The grueling excavation phase is over, but it gives way to a terrifying physical reality.
Yeah, the breach.
Right. They are now in a claustrophobic dirt tube, staring up at 3 feet of solid, steel-reinforced concrete that forms the floor of the vault.
And the timeline becomes absolutely critical here. It is Friday, September 10th. At 5:00 p.m., the bank closes its doors. The massive 5-ton steel vault door swings shut, and the bank manager engages the time lock.
Now, a time lock is a fascinating piece of engineering because it removes human agency.
Yeah.
Once that mechanism is wound and set, the vault cannot physically be opened by anyone. Not the bank manager, not the police, not the CEO of the bank. The internal bolts will not retract until 10:00 a.m. on Monday morning. By engaging that lock, the bank unwittingly hands Gavin's crew a completely uninterrupted 40-hour window where the vault is totally inaccessible from the surface.
The gang crawls to the end of their tunnel. And you really have to imagine the environment. It's essentially a dirt coffin, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, with zero ventilation.
It sounds like a nightmare.
It is. They implement Plan A. They drag a 100-ton hydraulic jack through the 40-foot shaft. The goal is to wedge thick wooden railway sleepers beneath the jack to create leverage, place the top of the jack against the concrete ceiling, and use hydraulic pressure to physically crack the 3-foot floor upward.
It's brute force mechanics, but every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When you push up against 3 feet of reinforced concrete with 100 tons of force, that force is also pushing down into the earth beneath the jack.
And the earth betrays them. Unbeknownst to the crew, their tunnel had crossed directly over the top of an old, forgotten Victorian well.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The ground beneath the railway sleepers wasn't solid. It was just a thin crust of dirt over a deep void. When they crank the hydraulic jack, the concrete ceiling doesn't budge. Instead, the extreme downward pressure causes the floor of their tunnel to collapse into the hidden well.
So they just lose all their leverage.
Exactly. The jack sinks, the leverage is gone, and Plan A is a total failure.
The physical toll at this point must be immense. They are miles past the point of exhaustion, but they move to Plan B. They drag the jack out and bring in the thermal lance.
The thermal lance is wild.
The physics of it are terrifying, especially in an enclosed space. It operates by pushing pressurized oxygen through a long steel tube packed with alloy wires, usually iron or magnesium. When you ignite the end, the pure oxygen causes the metal to burn in a hyperexothermic reaction. We are talking about a localized flame burning at roughly 8,000 degrees Fahrenheit. If you picture blowing pure oxygen onto a smoldering campfire, it turns into a blowtorch. A thermal lance is designed to melt through solid steel and concrete by turning the material itself into liquid slag.
The investigative reports detail the horrific aftermath of using this tool in that specific environment. I mean, igniting an 8,000-degree flame inside a 40-foot unventilated dirt tube is borderline suicidal.
Yeah, where does the heat go?
Nowhere. As soon as the lance hits the concrete, it starts pouring out a stream of molten rock and steel. Sparks and liquid slag are raining down on the men in the cramped space.
But the heat isn't even the deadliest part. It's the byproducts of the reaction. The lance instantly fills the dead-end tunnel with thick, toxic metallic smoke. The men are suddenly suffocating. They are coughing violently, their eyes are burning, and the oxygen they need to breathe is being rapidly consumed by the lance itself. The concrete is barely softening, and the men are seconds away from passing out. They have to shut the lance off and drag themselves backward through the dirt to the basement of Lassac just to breathe.
So Plan B has failed.
Which brings the crew to the ultimate escalation. Plan C, explosives.
Using high explosives in a fragile, shored-up dirt tunnel beneath a city block is the definition of a last resort. They decide to use gelignite.
Right.
Gelignite is highly malleable, much safer to handle than raw dynamite, and it packs an immense concussive punch. But the margins for error are microscopic here. If they pack too much into the concrete, the upward blast will detonate the entire vault, blow out the walls, and potentially bring the multi-story bank building down on their heads.
Which would be catastrophic.
Right. But if they use too little, the downward force of the blast will simply collapse their tunnel, bury them alive, and leave the concrete completely intact.
So they proceed with agonizing precision. They drill small, strategic holes into the underside of the concrete floor, following Tucker's exact grid coordinates from the linoleum tiles. They pack the holes with the gelignite and wire the fuses. But again, they face the problem of sound. An explosion beneath the city street will draw every police officer in the borough.
So they wait in the dark, they press their ears to the dirt, and listen to the muffled sounds of the traffic on Marylebone Road above them.
This is so cinematic.
It really is. They are waiting for the acoustic signature of a massive heavy goods truck to rumble past. They need the ambient decibel level on the surface to peak so it can mask the acoustic shockwave of the detonation.
Wow.
A truck rolls over the asphalt, the ground rumbles, and they trigger the blast.
The concussive force punches perfectly through the floor. It creates a ragged breach, which they frantically widen using heady hammers and chisels. Finally, they clear an entry hole that measures exactly 12 by 14 inches.
Barely wider than a standard sheet of legal paper.
Exactly. They squeeze their shoulders through that impossibly tight gap and pull themselves up into the dark, silent vault. They are finally there, surrounded by 1,000 heavy metal safety deposit boxes. But they are also standing in a cloud of toxic, choking smoke generated by the gelignite blast.
Yeah.
And looking at this sequence of events, the collapsing well, the suffocating thermal lance, the underground explosion, it really forces an analysis of their psychological state. At what point does the desire for wealth become a psychological pathology? I mean, they almost buried themselves alive.
When you look at the behavioral profiles of the crew, specifically Anthony Gavin, the motivation clearly shifts during those 40 hours. At a certain point, it stops being a rational pursuit of wealth.
Right.
To walk away after digging for 9 weeks, after the jack failed, would have been a catastrophic defeat of the ego. Gavin was a man whose identity was tied up in physical dominance and beating the system. They pushed themselves to the absolute brink of death because admitting the architecture of the bank was stronger than their own will became psychologically unacceptable.
That makes total sense.
It is a profound manifestation of the sunk cost fallacy mixed with massive hubris.
That physical exhaustion and psychological strain brings the narrative right back to our opening scene. It's now late Saturday night. Robert Rollins is in his flat listening to his CB radio. The men inside the vault have breached the floor, but the air is poison. They're choking on the gelignite fumes.
The transcripts from Rollins' cassette recorder capture the exact moment the crew begins to fracture under the stress.
It's fascinating to read.
The men inside the vault are desperate to leave. They want to crawl back through the tunnel, get out of the noxious environment, sleep, and return on Sunday morning when the particulate matter has settled. But Bobby Mills, the lookout stationed on a nearby roof, is freezing, paranoid, and terrified that if they leave, they won't have the nerve to come back.
The transcript reads like a tense theatrical play. The lookout radio's down. "I'm suggesting we carry on tonight, mate, and get it done with." And the man inside the vault, likely Gavin, judging by the authority in his voice, snaps back with intense frustration. He says, "Look, the place is filled with fumes where we was cutting. And if the security come in and smell the fumes, we are all going to take stuppo and none of us have got nothing. Whereas this way, we have all got 300 grand to cut up when we come back in the morning."
And the lookout complains that if they leave, he won't be able to stay awake through the rest of the weekend. The inside man retorts, "My eyes are like organ stops, mate. I'm not going to be any good in the morning."
You can just hear the exhaustion.
The exhaustion in his voice is undeniable. Ultimately, the inside men pull rank. They squeeze back down through the 12 by 14-inch hole, crawl the 40 feet back to Lissac, and leave the millions sitting untouched in the dark.
And while the crew is trying to rest, Robert Rollins is desperately trying to convince Scotland Yard that he isn't a late-night crank caller.
Which took some doing.
Yeah, finally, at 2 a.m. on Sunday, the flying squad, the branch of the police that tackles serious armed robbery, arrives at his Wimpole Street flat. Rollins plays the cassette tapes for the detectives. The officers hear the exhaustion, the reference to cutting, and the talk of 300 grand. They instantly realize a massive, highly sophisticated heist is currently in progress.
The police response is immediate, but it is severely hampered by the technology of 1971.
Right, no GPS.
Exactly. To find the robbers, they deploy a radio detector van. This is a specialized vehicle equipped with an array of antennas designed to drive through the streets and triangulate the exact source of a localized radio transmission. However, in a dense urban environment filled with tall concrete and steel buildings, radio signals bounce and scatter. Pinpointing a low-wattage CB radio is incredibly difficult.
And the technological limitations are compounded by human error. As the tension is peaking in the early hours of Sunday morning, the driver of the crucial radio detector van literally goes AWOL.
I still can't believe this part.
Instead of hunting the signal grid by grid, the driver abandons his post and his vehicle to go visit his mistress.
It is a stunning failure of protocol. Without the tracking capabilities of the van, the police are completely blind. They know a bank is being robbed within a roughly 2-mile radius, but they have no idea which one.
Because there are hundreds of banks.
Exactly. So they're forced to conduct a massive, frantic physical search of 750 different banks across an 8-mile radius. Detectives are waking up bank managers at 4 a.m., dragging them out of bed and forcing them down to their respective branches to unlock the front doors so officers can shine flashlights into the lobbies.
Which brings us to the cinematic climax of the weekend. It is Sunday afternoon, roughly 3:3 p.m. The smoke in the vault has finally cleared. Gavin and his crew have crawled back through the tunnel, re-entered the vault, and are now systematically using heavy crowbars to violently pop open the safety deposit boxes. Suddenly, the radio crackles. It's the lookout. The police are standing on the street outside the Baker Street branch.
The police officers, accompanied by the Lloyd's bank manager, enter the building. They walk across the lobby and head down the stairs into the basement hallway, stopping directly in front of the massive steel vault door.
Inside the vault, chaos turns to absolute paralysis. Gavin and his men freeze, they switch off their flashlights, they sit in pitch-black silence, surrounded by a mountain of stolen cash and jewelry. Their hearts are hammering, their breathing is shallow. Just inches away, on the other side of that 3-foot steel door, are the detectives hunting them.
And the acoustics of the space become the deciding factor here. Because the time lock is engaged, the bank manager cannot open the door to let the police look inside.
They are completely locked out.
Right. So the officers press their ears against the cold steel of the vault door and listen. They strain to hear the sound of tools, of voices, of movement. But 3 feet of steel and concrete is an incredible acoustic dampener. They hear absolutely nothing.
The officers pull back from the door, they nod to the bank manager, declare the Baker Street branch completely secure, and walk out of the building to check the next bank on their massive list.
Inside the vault, the crew collectively exhales. They have survived the closest call imaginable. They beat the environmental alarms, they beat the concrete floor, and they just sat perfectly still while the police investigated the very room they were robbing.
It's unbelievable.
Feeling completely invincible, they spend the rest of Sunday emptying boxes. By the time they pack the loot into bags and crawl down the tunnel for the final time, they are millionaires.
They pulled off the perfect phantom crime. But their own hubris and one mind-bogglingly stupid administrative error is about to unravel everything they built.
The physical devastation of the vault was discovered at 10 a.m. on Monday, September 13th, when the time lock finally disengaged and the bank staff swung the door open.
The scene inside was apocalyptic. The immaculate linoleum floor was buried under a thick layer of concrete dust, chunks of rubble from the blast hole, and a sea of discarded, worthless documents. Out of the 1,000 safety deposit boxes housed in the vault, the gang had violently crowbarred open 268 of them.
The financial estimates of the haul are staggering and wildly variable depending on the source, primarily because of the nature of the stolen goods.
Right.
Estimates place the value of the stolen cash and jewelry anywhere from 1.5 million up to nearly 4 million pounds. Adjusted for inflation, that represents a score worth up to 54 million today. It is a monumental transfer of wealth.
But the gang wasn't content with just taking the money. They wanted to humiliate the authorities. As they were packing up to leave the vault for the final time, one of the men took a thick marker and scrawled a massive message directly onto the wall of the vault. It read, "Let's see how Sherlock Holmes solves this one."
It is a direct, taunting reference to Gavin's literary inspiration, and it perfectly encapsulates the psychological state we discussed earlier. They believed they were completely untouchable. They had outsmarted the system at every turn.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Operational security is only as strong as its weakest link. For all their brilliant, death-defying underground engineering, they made an error in the planning phase that is almost hard to comprehend.
Oh, it's brutal.
We need to look at Benjamin Wolfe, the 64-year-old silent partner tasked with securing their base of operations.
When Wolfe approached the landlord to lease the Lassac storefront, the very room where they would store 8 tons of dirt and launch an illegal subterranean excavation, he signed the lease agreement using his actual legal name.
It defies all logic. It's the equivalent of a highly trained team of operatives spending months constructing a completely silent, radar-invisible stealth bomber, pulling off the perfect airstrike, and then accidentally dropping a wallet containing their driver's licenses right on top of the target.
Exactly.
It instantly neutralizes all the sophisticated work they did.
When Scotland Yard detectives entered the destroyed vault, they simply looked down the 12 by 14-inch hole. They climbed into the tunnel, crawled the 40 feet, and emerged in the basement of Lassac. They found the abandoned thermal lance, the walkie-talkies, the plastic boxes filled with dirt, and the lease agreement. The police immediately checked the name on the lease, found Benjamin Wolfe, and placed him under intense, around-the-clock surveillance.
Wolfe, perhaps unaware he's being watched or simply panicking in the aftermath, leads the detectives directly to the rest of the crew. He initiates contact with Anthony Gavin, Reg Tucker, and Thomas Stevens. By the end of October 1971, barely 6 weeks after the heist, Scotland Yard swoops in.
Right.
They arrest Wolfe, Gavin, Tucker, and Stevens. During the chaotic sweep, they also intercept 2 couriers who are carrying 32,000 pounds in stolen banknotes.
But the arrests highlight a massive failure in the recovery effort. Despite capturing the ringleaders relatively quickly, the vast majority of the loot had already vanished into the labyrinth of the criminal underworld.
Gone.
Out of the estimated millions stolen, the police only ever recovered 231,000 pounds. The rest of the fortune was gone forever.
In January 1973, the men faced trial. Faced with the overwhelming physical evidence of the tunnel and the lease, Gavin, Tucker, and Stevens plead guilty to breaking and entering and possession of explosives. They are each sentenced to 12 years in prison.
Yeah, which is a heavy sentence.
Yeah. Benjamin Wolfe attempts to plead not guilty, claiming he was just a naive frontman who had no idea what was happening in his basement. The jury doesn't buy it. But due to his age, the judge shows slight leniency, sentencing him to 8 years.
However, the net didn't catch everyone. Mickey Gervais, the alarm expert, completely evaded the initial police sweep. He lived on the run for a decade, a ghost in the underworld, before vanishing entirely in the early 1980s.
Crazy.
He was never seen again. Bobby Mills, the freezing lookout on the roof, and several other unidentified accomplices who helped move the dirt also slipped through the cracks.
The physical perpetrators were dealt with, but the aftermath of the Baker Street robbery forces us to look at the other side of the equation. Who exactly were the victims? Who was storing their wealth in those 268 broken boxes?
The clientele of the Baker Street Lloyd's branch consisted of the rich and the powerful, and the police investigation immediately hit a bizarre wall. When Scotland Yard detectives asked the victims to come forward, identify their stolen property, and provide inventories to help build the criminal case, a highly significant number of them flat out refused.
Because safety deposit boxes exist in a gray area of privacy. People use them to protect valuables from burglars, yes, but they also use them to hide things from the state, from the tax authorities, from the press, and even from their own families.
Exactly.
We're talking about unregistered cash, illicit jewelry, and highly compromising personal documents. The police reports note that 8 specific box owners explicitly forbade the bank manager from even handing their names over to the investigators. They willingly chose to lose absolute fortunes rather than admit to the authorities what they had been hiding in the dark.
And that profound silence from the victims perfectly primes the environment for the legacy of this case. The physical thieves were sitting in jail cells, but the narrative of the walkie-talkie bank job immediately began to mutate into something deeply conspiratorial, weaving its way into the highest echelons of the British establishment.
The public quickly realized that if the victims were hiding secrets, the authorities might be hiding things too. And the most persistent rumor, a rumor that survived for decades and formed the entire basis of the 2008 Hollywood film The Bank Job, centers around the allegation of a D notice.
To understand the gravity of that rumor, we have to define the mechanism. A D notice, which is now referred to as a DSMA notice in the UK, is a formal, highly classified request issued by the government to the media.
Right.
It acts as a gag order, effectively banning newspaper editors and television producers from publishing a specific story on the strict grounds that the information threatens national security.
The rumor claims that within a few days of the Baker Street robbery dominating the front pages of every paper in the country, a D notice was suddenly deployed. The story supposedly vanished from the headlines overnight, replaced by an eerie media blackout. But why would the intelligence services care about a few amateur criminals tunneling into a bank?
Well, according to the rumors, the interest wasn't in the thieves, it was in what the thieves found. The most explosive claim is that one of those 268 broken safety deposit boxes belonged to someone connected to the royal family.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, the rumor alleges the box contained highly compromising, illicit photographs of Princess Margaret the Queen's sister in the company of a notorious London gangster and actor named John Bindon.
And the rumors didn't stop at the royals. Other variations claim the gang opened a box and found horrific photographs of a prominent conservative cabinet minister involved in the abuse of children. The story goes that the thieves intentionally left these specific photos strewn across the vault floor for the police to find, using them as leverage or simply as a twisted calling card.
As investigators relying on declassified sources, we have to be absolutely impartial about these claims. There is zero concrete, verifiable documentary evidence to support the existence of the royal photographs.
We have to be clear on that.
Right. In fact, one of the original perpetrators, who spoke anonymously to journalists years later, categorically denied finding anything related to Princess Margaret, though he did cryptically claim they found and left behind illicit material involving politicians.
The existence of the D notice itself is also heavily contested by historians. Investigative journalists have dug through regional newspaper archives and found that the robbery was still being reported on in smaller papers throughout the late 1970s, arguing that a nationwide gag order never existed.
Then there's Rollins.
Exactly. On the other hand, Robert Rollins, the amateur radio operator who intercepted the entire heist, swore on the record that while he was on his home phone giving an interview to a newspaper editor shortly after the crime, a police officer physically yanked the receiver out of his hand and told the editor they were forbidden from publishing the details.
So we are left with a massive contradiction. If the D notice is a myth and the scandalous photographs are urban legends, why do these rumors persist with such intense ferocity more than 50 years later?
It's a great question.
The answer lies in the bizarre actions of the British government itself regarding the case files.
In 2013, the National Archives began declassifying the historical records of the Baker Street robbery. Researchers and journalists expected to finally see the complete, unredacted picture of the investigation. Instead, they made a baffling discovery.
Yeah.
An 800-page file relating to the core of the police investigation had been placed under a strict, legally impenetrable embargo. It is sealed in the archives, not to be opened until January 2071. A full 100 years after Anthony Gavin broke through the floor.
It is the ultimate fuel for conspiracy. Embargoes of that length are incredibly rare. Why seal a seemingly simple closed-case bank robbery for a century? If the truth is just that Anthony Gavin and Reg Tucker dug a hole and stole a pile of cash, you release the files to the public.
Right, there's no reason to hide it.
Exactly. The very existence of a 100-year seal inherently implies that there is something contained within those 800 pages that the establishment believes is still too damaging, too dangerous, or too deeply corrupt to see the light of day.
Beyond the governmental secrecy, the sheer mechanical audacity of the crime left a permanent scar on the banking industry. The Baker Street job fundamentally exposed the vulnerability of physical fortresses. It proved that thick concrete walls, heavy steel doors, and sophisticated seismic alarms mean absolutely nothing if a determined crew can simply go under them.
It birthed the dark legacy of copycat subterranean crimes. If we jump forward to 2015, we see the infamous Hatton Garden safe deposit burglary in London.
Oh, yeah.
An elderly crew of master thieves breaks into an underground vault over a holiday weekend, using heavy-duty diamond-tipped drills to bore through the concrete walls, and who was alleged by underworld sources and journalists to be heavily involved in the planning of that 2015 heist, a man named Brian Reeder.
A man who, according to several historical investigations, was an original young associate of Anthony Gavin's gang back in 1971. The technology evolved from thermal lances to diamond drills, but the spiritual DNA, the foundational methodology of bypassing the vault door entirely, was born on Baker Street.
Which brings the reality of this case directly back to you, the listener. Think about the institutions we inherently trust. We believe that concrete, steel, complex alarm grids, and time locks provide absolute, infallible security.
Right.
We put our most precious assets, or our deepest secrets, into metal boxes, slide them into a vault, and we walk away feeling safe. But this deep dive proves that absolute security is a fragile illusion, highly dependent on the environment around it.
It is the ultimate irony of the entire operation. The very mechanism designed to keep intruders out, the unbreakable time lock on the vault door, is exactly what gave the thieves the protective, impenetrable shield they needed to empty the vault from the inside. The bank's greatest defense became the criminal's greatest asset, locking the police out while the gang operated in total peace.
So, as we close the book on the Baker Street robbery, we have to look toward the future, specifically to the year 2071. We have to ask, what might actually be waiting inside that sealed 800-page file?
Let's consider a completely alternative theory. What if the 100-year seal has absolutely nothing to do with protecting the legacy of the royal family? What if it isn't about hiding the illicit, scandalous affairs of 1970s politicians? Consider the man who actually led the police investigation on the ground, Detective Inspector Alec Heist.
According to numerous journalistic sources and historical accounts of Scotland Yard in the 1970s, Heist was widely known in the underworld as one of the most corrupt police officers in the force.
Wow.
During the Baker Street investigation, there were rampant, pervasive rumors that Heist was actually paid off by the gang. The allegation is that he accepted a massive bribe in stolen jewelry to intentionally misdirect the investigation, obscure evidence, and protect certain unidentified members of the crew from ever seeing the inside of a courtroom.
What if the real secret locked away in the National Archives isn't what the criminals stole from the elite, but how the elite investigators were actually working hand in glove with the criminals?
It forces a disturbing recalibration of the entire narrative. What if the silence wasn't about protecting victims, but about protecting the very institution tasked with solving the crime?
It makes you wonder, when those archive doors finally swing open in 2071, we might just find that the real heist wasn't robbing the bank on Baker Street. The real heist was robbing the public of the truth. A heist executed not with hydraulic jacks and explosives, but with red tape and a silence that started as a muffled, echoing voice on a radio floating over the rooftops of London, waiting for someone to listen.
Thank you for joining us on this adventure. Until next time, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it and keep seeking the extraordinary.